Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Praxis South event on lamenting the past and embracing the future. My name's Norman Boakes, and it's my privilege to chair Praxis South and to welcome you to our event by Zoom today. A few practical points before we begin. Firstly, just to remind you that we are recording this event. So if you have a problem with that, just please send us a message in the chat so that we know that on what we may release later, we can do something so that your identity is protected. Secondly, what we're doing is with each of the three speakers, the host of each speaker will be trying to collate questions for them to be asked after they've spoken. So if you have questions for your speakers as they're speaking, please do send them using the chat facility. And you can send them to everyone, and those questions will be collated so that they're grouped in a way that we try to do justice to all the questions asked. And the third thing to say is that if by any chance you're not a member of Praxis South or of Praxis itself and you would like to join, then you'd be very welcome. If you go to the Praxis Worship website, the information is there about how you can join, and that of course gives you a discount on the charges for our events. This event, Lamenting the Past, Embracing the Future, has very much come out of the experience of the last 14, 15 months. Words like unprecedented, a roller coaster, have been used to describe them and have almost lost their meaning because of the impact that these last months have had upon us. Last Sunday at the Winchester Cathedral community event, just before the event, the Dean sent out a survey which asked people to tick the words which somehow expressed most of what they were feeling. And it was very interesting that out of those people who replied, the word that summed up most was the word hopeful. And there are other words around that, like cared for, loved, encouraged. But a number of people commented during the event that if that questionnaire had been sent out some months earlier, their response would have been quite different. Despairing, lost. Those were some of the words that people would have said. And it may be among us here that this terrible mix of emotions is very prevalent at present. And within that, I think for many people, there is quite a deep tiredness as well. For all those clergy, lay ministers, all those who've been engaged in doing worship online, this has been an exceedingly demanding time. And we're trying to look after ourselves at present, as well as provide resources for others. How do we allow people to express liturgically their sense of loss, grief, pain, bewilderness, while at the same time affirming the truth in the death and resurrection of Jesus, that we have a sure and certain hope that, as Julian wrote, all shall be well. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us the three speakers to share some of the ideas about how we can do this. And we hope as well, in the groups that will be meeting just before lunch, that you will also be able to share some of the ideas that have worked for you. We're going to start, though, with a moment of prayer, beginning with Psalm 23, which has for many people found a new meaning during this time. The Lord is my shepherd, therefore can I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. He shall refresh my soul and guide me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of those who trouble me. You have anointed my head with oil, and my cup shall be full. Surely goodness and loving mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let us pray. God of all that has been, that is to come, as we reflect on the months that have passed, those we have lost, those we have missed, the contact not made, the hopes dashed, new things discovered, new opportunities seized, new love embraced. We thank you that you have been with us and brought us to this day. Stay with us as we step into your future with faith and hope and love. And in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. It's very good to have you with us for this event, and it's my pleasure now to hand over to my colleague Stuart Thomas, who will introduce our first speaker, Tim Thornton, for us.
Well, good morning, everybody. As Norman said, I'm Stuart. I've been part of this Praxis South group for a while now. In fact, I think I was probably one of the first members of it, I think about 10 years ago. So I was delighted to be part of this event. It's a rather unique event because with what we've been through. And I want to introduce to you our first speaker, my very good friend, for the last 40 years, I think, Tim Coleman. Reverend Tim Coleman has just finished, has retired from his post as Trust Chaplain at, I think I'm right in saying, Barking, Havering and Redbridge University Hospitals Trust. But particularly working in Romford and Ilford, he was at the heart as a hospital chaplain of some of the most difficult and challenging circumstances in both of these serious waves of the pandemic. Tim has thought long and hard and worked long and hard on what does it mean to worship God when you're in those situations. He has been there and experienced it himself, and he has in fact prepared a liturgy which he's going to talk to as he goes through, but please be assured that he has kindly agreed that we will put that liturgy on the website after this event so that you can access it and use it as you will. Thank you for that, Tim. Also to say that as Tim is speaking, you are welcome to ask questions on the chat. If you see somebody has just asked the question in the chat that you were about to ask, please feel free not to type it a second time. I will be moderating that and trying to group questions so that we get as wide a range of questions as is possible. Tim will need to finish at about 12 o'clock. So with big thanks to Tim, I'm going to hand over to him now.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, everybody. I am honoured to be part of this conference and to share with you my experiences over the last 15 months as a hospital chaplain. As Stuart just mentioned, a month ago, I retired from 32 years of ordained ministry. 19 of those were in acute hospital chaplaincy, and without any doubt, this last year has been the worst. From February, March 2020, when rumours of a pandemic became horrifically true, to eventually witnessing something like 1,700 deaths in the hospitals that I serve in. That number of deaths is twice the number of deaths that's been experienced in Australia, for example. March last year, it unfolded slowly, and then all of a sudden it happened. I took some annual leave away from one hospital context, everything normal, the entrances as we have had them for 20 years, and came back to something altogether. Everything changed. Initially, we were told that we could only attend the dying, which of course in those circumstances did occupy us. But soon we found ourselves shifting our time to support traumatized staff, nurses, young mothers, who at the time didn't know about the risks to themselves or their children at home, not knowing what they were bringing back to those homes. There was a time when we had to advise families of where their loved ones' bodies had been moved to because the mortuaries in the hospitals couldn't cope. I looked at some notes in the bereavement office, and that survey of notes indicated that 80% of those who had died, it was a random sample, but 80% of those who had died were either my age or younger. This awful disease struck across all ages and all populations. And because I worked in East London, where a large number of the inpatient population came from the BAME community, my part-time Muslim colleague could not cope on her own. So she had some local imams help her. It was death and dying everywhere, the invisible source of it everywhere, seeking out me as well, when I was only just a few weeks away from retiring. But thankfully I'd already had, as an NHS worker, one Pfizer jab, and I survived. And like everyone else, we in the NHS went home to lockdowns and isolation. Healthcare workers, I promise you, are really good at letting off steam, but it was illegal for us to do so. So we bottled up our fear and suppressed our anger, and could only in some cases express itself in a 1,000-yard stare. So compared with many in lockdown, we did have something purposeful to do, but it was strange and isolating, frightening, and often tragic. So I'm asked, what does worship mean in those circumstances? It has always meant take each person as they come, find out about them, their or their family's story, never assume, adapt to them, find words or prayers that would be spoken by them, what is on their heart, and pray it with them and back to them. Prayers and how we say them in hospital chaplaincy have to adapt to the specific context we find ourselves in. Hospital chaplains need to sit lightly to our own traditions or our creeds anyway, but with overrun minority faith colleagues and our Roman Catholic priest colleagues forbidden by the bishop to attend anyone but the imminently dying, this was no time for theological or doctrinal purity. In the first lockdown, we had to attend the dying without their family being there to tell those dying people that their family loved them, say prayers, maybe, hopefully, with a Christian nurse by my side, praying with me too, and then having to go back and report to the family what we've been able to say. All of us inhabiting a world we didn't want to be in. Pastoral care without being able to hold a hand, compassion via Skype. So any prayers, I said, had to recognise the altered conditions I found myself in, express the family's love to the person before and during my prayers. It meant a lot to me when a nurse would stand by me for these prayers. For what is church if it's not a gathering? And saying them alone has never felt ideal, pandemic or not. Many of those nurses in our hospitals anyway have come from Roman Catholic countries. And I've been working in those hospitals for 20 years. They kindly call me father. I felt honoured to be treated as such. Corporate worship was forbidden. Daily prayers were suspended. But once the summer last year arrived and we felt a little safer, I would lead a short, socially distanced Holy Communion for our team and other Christian hospital staff who had missed our daily prayers. Less than 10 of us, because only that number could fit in our chapels, using free church self-contained disposable twin cups and wafers, if you've ever seen those. No cross-contamination, no shared peace, but a mini oasis on the boundaries of permissibility. Further lockdowns hindered and halted this, and with them we were forced apart as a chaplaincy team, mostly working alone as offices couldn't be shared. 60% of frontline NHS staff have reported issues of mental health concern for themselves. I wonder about the other 40%, too traumatised or too ashamed to admit to fragile mental health. Staff would tell me of the saddest stories. Man and wife both in ITU, father and son, people who died without their family or only seen through a screen of an iPad. Colleagues, hospital colleagues who died of COVID because they worked on COVID wards. Imagine how the surviving staff on those wards felt. Confused, guilty, frightened. After the first wave, I became convinced that frontline staff were a time bomb of post-traumatic stress. I couldn't see them surviving a second wave, but they or we had no choice. Those who have survived, few have survived to be the same person. Trauma like this is hardwired into our psyches. No prayers for these brave and wonderful people can be said without acknowledging this form of long-term COVID, this long-term COVID of mental health. We must pray that enough of them can continue to work in the NHS as we become overrun with delayed elective surgery, delayed cancer diagnosis, and delayed cancer treatment. Despite spending 2/3 of my ordained ministry in hospitals, I've always understood my priestly ministry to be rooted in that of a parish priest. Thus, for the moments I am by the bedside of someone else's parishioner, I am their proxy priest, parish priest, and I will serve. And as I serve, and still do serve in the London Borough of Redbridge, where I was a vicar, this seems natural. Taking services as I do around the local churches in the 3 London boroughs that feed into the hospitals I work in, it's always felt that this proxy role, this parish priest proxy role, is natural. Mid-first lockdown, I took an infection-controlled funeral of a person I knew very well. I had visited her husband, who some 15 years ago in our ITU, who was recovering from gastrointestinal surgery. So I got to know her, I got to know him very well, and it just so happens that her church is one of the churches I often take services in. So because her priest, when she died, had to shield and couldn't take her funeral, and the same applied to her family, I took her funeral in a funeral director's viewing room, recorded on one of the funeral director's smartphones. Her body taken the next day for cremation in an overrun crematorium. I say this as liturgically, I feel the most meaningful worship has to be, and has this ever been any different, that of the Eucharist. When I deputise for colleagues, they know that I am much keener to take their parish communion than their non-Eucharistic services. Priest, proxy or not, the Eucharistic community uniquely expresses the pain and hope that we all carry, that we're all called to carry. When I visit them in their churches, it makes it a whole lot more seamless when I do so by their bedside. Sunday bedside communion is my Eucharist too. And the Eucharist also seems to be the most appropriate expression of where we are all now, inside or outside a hospital. The Last Supper's roots in the Passover's final awful plague, almost too poignant a precursor for our current situation. And in the anamnesis principle that this night is as the night itself, true for those who have been in hospitals as patient or nurse or doctor or chaplain. Those days are never going to leave us, and maybe, heaven forbid, might return in a third wave this winter. Perhaps many of us have also felt betrayed by the hard to get by or non-existent PPE, late lockdowns and 1% NHS pay rise for all the effort. No peace, no touching and no communal events. We have been estranged from makes us human and from the means by which we celebrate life in the church and life in Christ. The Passover carried with it uncertainty, fear, death and survival. Hope in the promised land carried our forebears forward, but it was no 5-minute job. The Last Supper to the early Eucharistic prayers of Hippolytus, no 5-minute job either. It feels like at the moment we are in the hinterland between bondage and freedom, the desert of vaccinations and face masks and no hugging, or at least until next week. Wildernesses are normal. We've had 2 Lents in lockdown. This last 14 or 15 months has felt like one long Lent, one long wilderness. I've written a liturgy for the Eucharist for this time as we ease out of lockdown, and hopefully that will be the end of it. And I'm very happy to share it with you all. It will be posted on the website. And so to conclude, it has been just an awful time to work in a hospital and a pretty awful time everywhere else too. The trauma of the last 14 or 15 months will take a long time to recover from, for those who can recover. Hospitals and hospital workers will never be the same, but we can look forward together for a less stressful time. Hospital chaplains will go back to taking bedside communions again. Above all, I look forward to leading Eucharistic services inside and beyond hospital walls as we go back to being more like the church that we remember, although locally at least we'll never be unscarred by the pandemic. I'll now hand back to Stuart.
Thanks very much, Tim. I don't know what all of you felt. I thought it was a very moving account of what it means to minister and to minister liturgically in a context which none of us could previously have imagined. I'm sure, Tim, you would say you couldn't have imagined what it would be like, and knowing you as I do. I mean, I know perhaps a little more of what you've been through in detail, and it has been awful. So I've had a couple of questions so far. I think the first one Tim, was about survivor mentality.
Yes.
Really, the question, I think, was really saying, when we're ministering to people, perhaps certainly where I am, with a very large NHS hospital within 5 minutes walk, how do we minister to those who may have been in part of the front line in facing COVID? What are people's expectations, perhaps, Tim, if they come to us for ministry or worship?
Are you thinking of NHS workers or anyone that's...
I'm reading the question as referring to that specifically. Although
NHS workers.
Some of those who have recovered from COVID would also feel as though they're survivors.
Well, my perception is that, as I implied in what I said, is that a lot of NHS staff are going to be carrying a lot of stress from this time at its two peaks. And when the first peak, you thought it can't get any worse than this. When you went into ITU and you put all this PPE on, feeling really frightened myself, be there for perhaps less than 20 minutes, and the staff there, perhaps with one break, would be there for a 12-hour shift. How terrifying it was and alienating, and how it has stayed with them. And I just could not believe, well, I wondered what they could do if it happened again. And yet we had no choice. We just had to do it, forcing ourselves to do it. So for those who've been working in the NHS, I know that some haven't been able to carry on. I remain really concerned about them. And like any kind of trauma care, I think it's really important to give people time to speak through their story, find out what they've got to say. And I think they've got to say it again and again. And like I also said, I hope that enough of them can carry on. It's a real concern of mine going forward. They've had a terrible time. And like I said, the staff I had visited the next day after a doctor had died on one of the COVID wards, how awful it was for them. Yes, so they will need, people who've been working in the NHS will need special care, I think. And the other thing about people who work in the NHS, of course, is that we are not terribly good at caring for ourselves. We're really good at caring for others. So it might be difficult to get them to open up and to admit. I think of, like I say, if 60% of NHS staff admit to mental health issues, frontline NHS staff, that only means that 40% aren't admitting to it, and they'll perhaps be the ones that will need to be kept an eye on.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Now, another question here, another very helpful question, which is related, I think, to that answer. How can those of us who have not experienced the trauma personally best support those who have? Now, that obviously could refer to those who've suffered from COVID, been in hospital perhaps. Very few of us wouldn't know somebody or of somebody with whom that's not true. It could equally be those who have suffered at the bedside of someone who has had COVID, or not at the bedside because of the distancing. And how can someone like me support, both in terms of what I do in church as a parish priest and worshipping, but equally on a pastoral basis, those who have been seriously affected by all that's happened?
Well, part of it is that for those who weren't working in hospitals, it's still true that the half terrible thing about the whole thing, the lockdowns, the isolation, all of that, you experienced like I experienced, and it was it was awful for us who worked in the NHS. Like I said at the very end, we did have something to do, so at least we weren't only at home. I could go out to work, and in a way that was welcome. I don't know how I would have stood it, just being locked at home all day for 7 days a week. So in a way that was a good thing, but we all suffered the lockdown, and we all suffered the fear of catching it, and the knowledge that some of our neighbours or members of our family, I think we've all been affected by it. So in terms of that important empathy of being side by side with someone, to some degree, we already share a lot of that. That we haven't seen the inside of an ITU when no families can visit, and you away just wearing that PPE. All I can say is I'm glad that you've been spared it. And I think probably your empathic imagination probably can take you to where these people have been. And like with all sort of interactions of empathy, you can probably hopefully feel what people feel, even though you haven't yourself felt it, just by being with them and showing compassion.
Okay, that's lovely. I'm going to. There's an important question sitting there, but I want to go on to the one about how supporting the bereaved. Fee, you say, I'm thinking especially of those who had to be completely alone after the death of a spouse or close family member, unable to be comforted by anybody. I cannot even begin to think how awful and damaging that experience must have been. Totally inhuman. And perhaps all of us have been in that situation of supporting somebody who has died, but unable to be there when they were died, whether or not that was of COVID. I think of several here. How can we support the bereaved, Tim?
Well, it's going to be, it's going to go on for years and years from now, isn't it? As we know, bereavement changes people's lives, often forever. Of course it does. And owing to the fact that they were, for certainly in the first wave, unable to be by the bedside. And I, of course, experienced this because I was like the go-between between the family and those who were dying in the hospital context. So I experienced it at that sort of raw point. But going on from here, I have already expressed how concerned I am for NHS staff, but how concerned we must all be for the mental health of our community because of what people have gone through. All I can say is, without any doubt, for those who have gone through this kind of bereavement, there's going to be even more pastoral care demands on them. And I don't know what, in terms of bereavement support, there is available in people's various communities. We've got a few things that go on through our hospitals where we organise kind of a morning coffee for those who have been bereaved because their relatives died in our hospitals. There is some bereavement support going on out there. There's some funeral directors that offer some really good support, I have to say. I know it's a bit patchy, I know that too, but for us who serve as parish workers, those who've gone through it and not been able to be with their loved ones as they die, we've just got to keep an eye out for them and get by their sides. And I should think there's a lot of room for training more pastoral assistants and that kind of thing going forward.
Thanks, Tim. Jan, you very helpfully put in the chat, you might want to follow this up, everyone. There's a very useful website called ataloss.org. I'm sure that has good resources on it that we can dip into. Although, of course, there's no one size fits all. I think we all realise that. But no, the web address is there if you want to follow that up. Here's an interesting question from Christopher. I feel I've lost some of my listening skills during lockdown. What could I do to recover them? to pray as relatives would.
I wouldn't be surprised that we've lost lots of kind of skills during lockdown, haven't we? Especially if we haven't had much opportunity to be with people. And even like I mentioned that I was roughly, I think the last 6 months of this last year, I was pretty much working alone in the hospital. So I would respond to calls. I'd go and visit patients, often, sadly, of course, when they were dying. I would meet other staff members in the corridor, but you could never linger because you weren't supposed to. You had to keep 2 meters apart. You were wearing a mask. So even in my context, to some extent, those social personal skills were tempered, should I say, or restricted. I think I think that's a good question, and I just think we just got to be brave and go back into it, realizing that everyone else is going back into it, aren't we? That we've all had different experiences, but also common experiences, and I'm hoping that when we go back to church and we go back to doing our pastoral work, that we will be able to go back. But I think it will be different. I think that first, some of our early pastoral work and taking funerals again, and they'll be more normal. All of that will be a challenge. But what can I say other than it's the same for all of us.
Okay, Tim, I'm aware that time is ticking by. 2 other questions. I'd love you just to say how you developed the liturgy, but one of the questions actually is very, very appropriate. But did you see, I think it's Bryony asked, did you see more openness to spirituality developing over that time, or did you feel people were going in the opposite direction?
Oh no, I don't think people were going in the opposite direction. And when I was able to sit down with, and to be honest, most of my interactions were with other staff, nurses and doctors, I felt that people very much appreciated hospital chaplains being around, understood that much of what was going on had to do with the soul, and their souls, our souls, were troubled. So I think there's no, it's not gone in the other direction, not at all. I think there is openness to spirituality. It's been a strange time, and of course in lockdown, people have had more time to reflect on their lives, haven't they?
Yeah.
And as they've connected with nature, maybe there's a broader issue connecting with wider issues of the soul. So my perception is that it's not alienated people from spirituality, and maybe has made people question more, seek out more, would be my guess.
That's it. But actually, Rosemary, I hope that reflects your question as well, which is about how you responded to folk who questioned God's role in this. Probably got to be we can't have too many more questions, but if you could, did you have to respond to anyone?
Well, I have. You could say that perhaps every day as a hospital chaplain, someone might ask that kind of why question. And so my answer has been that God does not ever spare us pain. He does share our pain. When we're, and all hospital chaplains, I suppose everyone in ministry has got to work out their own theology of unmerited suffering. If you don't do that as a hospital chaplain, you're in trouble on day one. But that's always kind of in the background, how your own theology of unmerited suffering. So if someone asks me why, I have to say I can't answer that question. There's no easy answers for that question. But I think the best thing always is try to sort of reflect back as well. Try not to give them your answers because they're your answers. Sometimes if someone says, well, is God testing me? Have I done something wrong? Then I usually end up saying, whilst trying to listen to what's going on for them, I just have to find out. I have to say, I don't believe that God is testing you. What kind of God does that? In terms of what have I done wrong, I say, well, no, you've not done anything wrong. In my experience as a priest, both in the parish and in the hospital, this is no good. Awful things happening people is by no means isolated to people who have done bad things. It chooses the good and bad equally, and our hope above all is an incarnational hope that God is with us in our suffering and will give us strength through our suffering, because he certainly doesn't spare us it.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to come back to your liturgy quickly, just so you can tell us a tiny bit about how you develop it, because Sue's asked this very important question. Have you any thoughts about processing anger and frustration liturgically?
Well, of course, it's maybe this liturgy is me processing my anger and frustration. It was just in reflecting on this day and my own contribution. For whatever reason, it kind of came out of the blue. The Eucharist is a very obvious focus for that. And as I told my story, that it's always been the thing for me, both as a parish priest and now, as a hospital chaplain, but as a hospital chaplain who takes services in dozens of local churches. I've always very much appreciated the Eucharist because it contains all those key issues, it seems to me, on the eve of Passover, Passover itself, and the Last Supper. All those sort of strong emotions of what is before our Jewish forebears and before our Lord and the disciples, all that's going on for us now. And anger too. It's all been frustrated, hasn't it? There's anger too. Who are we angry with? Well, as I said in my own theology, I don't think I can be angry with God. Not that God forbids me to be angry, but it's not God's fault. This has happened in the strange world that we find ourselves in. But to express ourselves liturgically, our fears and our concerns, our anger going forward, is what we naturally do, isn't it? And to embody that in the Eucharist, or the Eucharist, the prayers of the Eucharist that I've written, at least shares how I've been feeling about it. And as I feel now, going out from it, that we are going into a new future, which I do feel hopeful about. But we will always carry that past and that history. There's no avoiding that, because it's going to be there.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Can I say thank you very much, too, for allowing us to all access your liturgy. It will be on the website a little bit later today, I hope. Obviously, hospital chaplaincy is not exactly the same as working in a parish, but nonetheless, there are things that we can take from the experience of people like Tim into the work we do in perhaps a less stressful but more a context in which we're dealing with the aftermath of COVID for much longer in a different way. And for a different kind of group of people. Just to say, Hannah, thank you. We've put another website on the chat here, thebereavementjourney.org, which is lay-led. These are all things that any of us can buy into. So do make a note of that if you feel that's something you would find helpful.
I'll just jump in there, Stuart. I want to say that actually I'm very aware, having done 13 years of it, that being a parish priest and working in a parish context is stressful.
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's why I did 19 years in hospital chaplaincy.
Yeah, I know.
By and large, they were 19 years less stressful than they were in the parish.
Yes, and that's a very important point. Thank you, Sheila, for saying, because most of us, obviously there are many ordained clergy on this call. And for those who aren't, you've probably got very good access to those who are. And Sheila says, as a diocesan councillor, real concern for the impact the pandemic has had on clergy. Stress, depression, exhaustion, great expectations from congregations that everything will go back to normal. Obviously then, thank you, Sheila, the importance of good listening skills, which we mentioned earlier, and coping strategies, and permission for clergy who have perhaps had to do funerals, not necessarily even of COVID victims, but of those who, for loved ones who were unable to be with their husband, wife, whoever it was at the end of their life. Certainly I had quite a few of those. So there is a different kind of grieving in that. So thank you, Sheila, for raising that. If we're for those who are clergy, maybe a majority of us today, I think perhaps we all need to look after ourselves better. I can't truthfully say I'm the best at it or anything like, but equally, if you're not ordained, but do bear in mind the clergy around you who may not express directly the stresses and the anxieties and the demands and challenges of what they're doing now, but it doesn't mean those things aren't there. I think that's a very good point. Tim, I just want to say a huge thank you to you for doing this, for giving of yourself, because I know perhaps far better than most others on this call just how much it's cost you, and how much pain you've been through during this whole period. I know that you have to get off now, but thank you everyone for your questions. Yeah, and thank you also some LLMs. I'm counting all official ministers, I think, here who carried a parish through a pandemic, because there hasn't been a cleric in post. Yes, we've had a few of those of you who carried a parish in that situation. Many also will have struggled with that, and perhaps without feeling the same sense of authority. It is 12 o'clock now, and we obviously need to move on to a different set of circumstances now. Bless you, Tim. It's been really, really, I think, moving, but very helpful too, to focus our thoughts. The liturgy will be on the website later. If you need now to just have a quick stretch or whatever, feel free. But I'm going to hand over, I think, to my very good colleague, Sue Wallace, for sort of a very different spin on this from a parish priest. So thank you, Sue, and we wish you a lovely day, Tim. Bless you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you. Yes, so when we were planning, we were thinking about these three contexts: chaplaincy and cathedral, but also parish. And we didn't want to approach a parish which had a full multimedia tech team, because actually they're usually all right. We wanted to look at sort of an ordinary parish without lots of money and lots of technical kits. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to have Bryony Taylor with us today. Now, Bryony's a rector of two churches in northeast Derbyshire, near Chesterfield. And before she became a vicar, she worked as a social media consultant before ordination. So the pandemic brought those two parts of her life together in a whole new way. So it's great to have you with us today, Bryony.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I feel a bit of a outsider, really, further north than where you all are, but it's great to be with you today, and I was very moved by what Tim had to say. So just to kind of summarize what I'm going to be talking about today, there's sort of 5 things I'm going to be looking at. The first is thinking about what it was like doing church online and the approach that I took to that. The second one is looking at All Souls and bereavement services and how they've sort of been in the last year, and some reflections on that. Third point really is then looking towards the future, and some of us are starting to use this phrase hybrid church. And now there's all these sort of terms, they come and go. I think hybrid church is a useful bridge term to describe where we're at the moment, because what we're doing isn't solely online, and it's not solely in the church buildings, and we have to have some word to describe what it is we're doing. So many of us are using this term hybrid to mean a mixture of tech and kind of in-person stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to show you quite an easy worked example that anyone could try, and then look a bit to the future. So hopefully that will be helpful for people, and there might be one or two things that you can take away from today, from my experience. But as Sue said, I'm a vicar of two churches. I'm on my own. I don't have a big team around me, but I have got the benefits of having worked in social media before I was ordained. So I sort of knew what I was doing in terms of trying to move online, in terms of worship, but I don't have loads of money or tech or anything like that. So most of the things I'm talking about today are doable for one person on their own. I've also put a link in the back of my presentation, and I'm sure I can email this presentation to be shared amongst those that have attended today if they want to have a copy. But my website has lots of guides on how to do the things that I'll be talking about today. So if you see something and think, oh, I want to know how to do that, there's lots of stuff on my website. Okay, let me get stuck in then. There we go. A year ago, I was giving a similar talk for people thinking about moving to doing stuff online. And so I came up with these 5 principles for hybrid ministry. So I wrote these a year ago, and I think what's very interesting is that I think they're still very relevant. So these are my 5 principles, and the first one I've been repeating as a mantra for a whole year, well, more than a year, because I think one of the things that was really hard for us at the beginning of lockdown was seeing some church up the road that seemed to be doing everything and seemed to have everything sorted, and sort of looking at it and thinking, oh gosh, I can't do any of that, and feeling completely overwhelmed. And I think it was a bit among some clergy, I must confess, I think there was a bit of competitiveness that was quite unpleasant, really, which was really unhelpful. And I had an image actually when I was praying at the beginning of lockdown, and I'm not usually the kind of person that has these sort of visions or whatever, but I was reminded of the rescue at Dunkirk and all the boats that went to help bring our boys back. And if those people involved in that rescue operation had gone, well, I've only got a little boat, I'm not like that big boat up there, then people wouldn't have been rescued. Everyone worked with what they had. So the small boats managed to bring 3 people back, the big boats brought 50 people back, and everybody was aiming for the same thing. And I think that's quite a helpful way of thinking about it, is that you just have to work with what you have. So don't play the comparison game. As Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. So don't feel so bad that you can't do the same thing as somebody up the road, because there'll be some things that you can do that they can't. So don't compare yourself, would be my first thing. The second one is, if you're trying new things, just try one thing at a time. It was, again, I'm sure many of you are like me and a little bit overwhelmed, thinking, oh golly, do we do Zoom? Do we do Skype? Do we do Facebook? Do we do YouTube? Just try one thing at a time, and master it, and then move on. And be ready to say, actually, we tried that and it didn't work. I tried Skype one Sunday morning and it was a disaster, but we tried it. The third thing is context is key. Everyone's context is different. Even if you're in the same town, you can have very different contexts in your congregation and different needs. And it's quite easy to sort of, people say, well, somebody kind of had a go at me for not opening my church up for private prayer. In her context, that was appropriate. In mine, it wasn't, because our churches aren't normally open anyway. So everyone's context is different. The fourth one, and I think this is one of the things that's been a positive, really, coming out of the pandemic, is the issue of inclusion and how we can include more people in our worship. And I think it's always wise when we're trying anything new to think, well, who's not going to access this? Who's missing? Who am I leaving out? And how can I help them to join in as well? And then the fifth point really is just keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. I used to train people how to use technology for learning. And we used to use this phrase e-learning, which interestingly has sort of disappeared into history now as a phrase. But I used to say to teachers, the E should stand for enhanced rather than electronic. So I used to say to them, if a pen and paper, if a flip chart and a pen will do what you want it to do, then use that. You don't have to use PowerPoint, for example. So keep it simple. You don't always have to do everything in a techie way. So they're my sort of 5 principles for hybrid ministry. And I think they're sort of still relevant, even though I wrote them a year ago. Moving on to thinking about what it was like when we could only do online church. I took this approach. I thought to myself, if we can only do online, then why not try some things that we wouldn't be able to do in our church building? So that's how I approached quite a few of my online services. So I had a lot more freedom to share video, which isn't easy to do in my medieval churches, and try some different things. So rather than try and replicate the experience of being in a church building sort of online, I kind of tried to look at it in a slightly more creative way and say, well, what things can we do in the online space that we wouldn't be able to do if we were in church altogether? One thing, just to give you an example, for Palm Sunday last year, I encouraged people, and I'll show you a little video of what happened in a second. I encouraged people to share a photograph of a cross drawn on their palm. So we did palm crosses. So I asked people to basically get felt tip, draw a cross on their hand. They could put the date if they wanted to, so 2020 it was. I was going to say 2021 then, 2020, and take a photograph of their hand and share it with me. And it was great because quite a few, obviously, members of the congregation joined in with that, but quite a lot of people that maybe don't normally come to church joined in, and they did it with their children, and they sent pictures of their children's hands, and it was an easy thing to do. You know, it didn't cost anything, and I got everybody to send me a picture of their palm cross, and then I created a video out of all the palms, and I'll show you that in a minute. So that was one way of doing the palm cross thing, because I wanted something kind of tangible, because I know some churches managed to distribute palm crosses, but that wasn't something that I was able to do. So that's what I chose to do for that. And then, of course, one of the best things about Palm Sunday is your procession through the village. We sort of usually go through the village, singing "All Glory, Lord and Honor." And so what I did was I went on, actually I've put Google Earth here. It wasn't Google Earth, it was Google Street View. I went on Google Street View and I basically did a video of Google Street View of walking along the street by both of my churches. So I made a sort of, I think it was about a 4-minute long video going through both villages and ending up at the church. And I videoed that using some free software called Screencast-O-Matic, which is an online thing. You don't have to download anything. It's really good. And it will capture anything that you're doing on your screen as a video. And so I made that video of walking through the streets, and then I put the music of "All Glory, Lord and Honor" over the top of it. And so we had a virtual palm procession through the villages, and I think people really enjoyed that because they got to see the church buildings that they hadn't been to for a while. And I did the same thing actually when it came around to Remembrance. I did exactly the same thing, and so I made a video walking from my church to the war memorial, and put Nimrod over the top of it. And it was actually quite moving in the end. It worked really well, and people liked seeing the streets that they perhaps hadn't been out to see. So let me just quickly show you the Palm Cross video that I made, that I sort of started the service with for Palm Sunday. There we go. So you can see I made it using this thing called easymoza.com. Basically, you just collect all the photos that you want to use. You can use people's faces, you can use anything. But I thought if I did the hands, then that solves any issues around safeguarding and all the rest of it. And basically you choose the main picture that you want to create. So I found a picture of it's a bit of an old-fashioned picture really of the triumphal entry, and then you just upload all the photos to this website, and it creates a little video for you. It's absolutely brilliant, and it doesn't cost anything. You can pay money to have like a sort of high quality version of the mosaic if you want, but that was the one you've just seen is the free one, because it has the logo on at the end. But I thought I would just share that with you as a sort of simple thing that we did for Palm Sunday. Oh, started again. So I've actually reflecting on this year, I feel like I was more creative when we were solely online at the beginning of lockdown than I have been when we've sort of had a mixture of in church and online. Because now we're back in church, it's more a case of a static camera pointing at me in the services, which is kind of interesting. And I'm kind of wondering, how can I bring some of that creativity back in to more hybrid stuff? But one area that I do think is a potential area where online can be better than in the building is around All Souls. I don't know how other people have found this, but we did, because we were in lockdown in November, weren't we? How many lockdowns have we had now? But we were in lockdown for All Souls, and I did obviously a completely online All Souls service. I did do it live on Facebook, and I was quite moved really, because this picture that you can see here was actually shared by somebody in my congregation, and she just put our candles lit for All Souls Day. And it's basically a little shrine that she'd made at home with images of her partner who's died and one of her dogs actually, and she'd lit candles by those and taken a picture and put that on social media and joined in with the service. And I think what's interesting is for many people, a lot of the people that I invite to our All Souls service are people that we've taken funerals for in the last sort of 18 months or so. And for some of those folks coming into church, it's the first time that they've been in church since the funeral. And it can be quite traumatic for people. And especially for people that aren't church goers, they feel a little bit uncomfortable because they're not sure where to sit and stand, and they feel a bit awkward, and they're worried that people are going to be looking at them if they cry. And of course, online, all of those issues have gone. So there's a sense of all praying together. And one of the moving things, because we did it online, was that as I read the names of the loved ones out loud, the little, I don't know if people are familiar with Facebook Live, but when people share the little heart images, they sort of float up the screen. And so as I was reading the names, these little hearts were appearing. So there was definitely a sense of worshipping together, even though we couldn't see each other. But I think people were moved by it and made their own. I encouraged people to light a candle at home, and I gave them the space and the time to do that. And I think they were very moved by it because they were in their own safe space as they took part on their own terms. And so if they needed to have a big sob, they could, and it didn't matter. And so I think for me, as we move forwards, I think every year I will always offer a solely online All Souls service. I will do one in church as well. But I think for many people that will actually be a preferable option, especially, for anyone that is still very raw for. So I think that's kind of an interesting one. There may be other, you might have some ideas about other sorts of services that actually seem to work better online, but I think particularly around the bereavement theme, I think that's one area where being online is preferable. Right, where am I going next? Right, okay, so moving towards thinking about the future, really. I've been using this Venn diagram for a little while now, speaking to different people about hybrid church. And I think there's sort of three, I sort of see myself as looking after three categories of people, really. There's an online congregation. Some of those will be people that come to church as well. But there's some that have only been engaging with our stuff online. There's your congregation I was calling it offline congregation, but I changed it to congregation without internet because somebody said it sounded like a negative thing. But people who don't use the internet, so mainly people that would normally just physically come along to church on a Sunday or Thursday morning or whenever you do midweek services. And then there's a third group who are kind of like on the edges, the sort of curious observers. And interestingly, the other week, I have a cleaner that comes every couple of weeks, and she said to me, "Oh, I saw one of your services the other day on Facebook," and she just said, "Oh, I watched one," and she, you know, she's not somebody that comes along to church or anything like that. So I put her in that kind of curious observers category. She probably saw it pop up on Facebook and thought, "Oh, I might just have a little nosy and see what the service looks like." So I just share this Venn diagram to help you to think, well, where are you putting your energies? Are they, because what we would really want is to be in that sweet spot in the middle, doing something that's going to actually reach all three of those groups. But sometimes we find ourselves leaning more towards one than the other. So it's that sort of inclusion question really, but it's just to help you kind of think, okay, am I touching any of these, or am I only reaching one group? Just another bit of a sort of diagram really. This is partly to help you think through, again, where to focus your energies next really, because there's not a lot of point doing something really, really flashy on Zoom if only 3 people can access it. And I know that's a bit obvious, but sometimes the obvious needs stating really. So I wonder for you, where you feel most of your congregation sitting. I think probably where I'm at, it's probably this middle strip, which is people that have a smartphone or a tablet. I've got quite a lot of older people sort of in their 80s that have been given an iPad in the last year. And it's been quite funny because they've not really had anyone to show them how to use it. So they're kind of trying to work it out. And I've had some quite painful times trying to help people get onto Zoom and things on an iPad without having an iPad myself and trying to explain how to do it. But that's where most of my lot are. But obviously, most of them can access worship in the church building. But for those that don't have any internet at all, I was very concerned about this group at the beginning of lockdown. So there are a few things that I created for that group. One is something that I've dubbed Dial a Sermon. And there's guidance on how to set this up on my website if you want to have a look. And it's basically, I record my sermon as an MP3 file each week, and then I put it into this system called Twilio. And it basically enables you to use a local number. So I've got a local Chesterfield number that anyone can ring and they can listen. It's like an automate. I think some people thought I was waiting for people to call and then I would read out my sermon to them on the phone, but it doesn't quite work like that. But yeah, it's a recording and they can ring at any time and listen to my sermon. And very interestingly, I had a couple of older people who said that they listened to it twice. They listened to it on a Sunday morning and then they listened to it again later in the week, which is a bit frightening for a preacher, but there you are. Do make use of your notice boards. You'd be surprised actually if you do have a notice board that's kind of visible from the street, you know, make the most of it. Put stuff up there because people walking their dogs and stuff, they do read them. Of course, there's posted paper materials. A lot of us did that. I sent out a kind of Praying in the Pandemic booklet at the beginning of lockdown that a lot of people were using with like a little daily office in and Compline and things like that. And I've been doing phone church, which is basically using telephone conferencing, a free telephone conferencing system where you dial a number and then you have to put in 2 numbers, a room code and a PIN number, and then you're all in on the line at the same time. And I found actually phone church has been one of my favourite things that we've started this year, and that's going to stay forever now. And when we're back in church for that, we're not at the moment because it's an intimate service in the lady chapel and we can't sit that close together. But when we do go back in, I'll just put my phone on the altar on speaker and people can join in from home if they want to. And then the other options, of course, are all your online ones as well. I'm just going to move swiftly on because I can see I'm running out of time. So that's just to help you think, you know, where are my people at and what things could I offer that would help them? Just to give you a simple worked example of hybrid church, I pinched this idea from a Methodist minister that I know called Jo Cox-Darling, and she did this during lockdown. She had a chalkboard at the bottom of her garden where a lot of people were walking past, and she just put little thoughts for the day on her chalkboard and changed it sort of each week. So I decided this year, because I was a bit bored, especially in that terrible sort of first couple of months of this year that were just so awful, I bought a cheap chalkboard from Amazon and some chalk marker pens, and decided, and I attach it with a bike lock to the church railings. And we're quite lucky that we have quite a few people walking their dogs past our church door, and also people walk their children to school past the door of the church. And I just put a little quote on each week. So this one that's in the picture says, "God is never at the end of his resources when we are at the end of ours." And I've had, interestingly, I take a photo of it and I share it on social media each time I've refreshed it, so people can share the image online. But actually the impact in the village has been massive. Everyone's been talking about it. And when people see me in the street, they say, "Oh, I really like those chalkboards that you do." And I read them when I walk past, and I read them to my children. And it was so simple, and it's had a much bigger impact than I could have ever dreamt, really. So I just share that as something that was a really simple idea that's actually been quite effective, and it's just given me such an easy way to chat to people. And actually it's given something for people when they bump into each other when they're walking their dogs, something to talk about as well. And somebody said to me, "It's so nice to see something positive. There's so many negative messages out there. It's nice to talk about something positive." So that's been something that's given me a great deal of encouragement, really, especially in this tough last few weeks. So it's just a little example of, and I'd call that a truly hybrid thing, because of course people share it online as well. So it's kind of got a double impact. As I said before, if I've taught any of those things that I've mentioned, things like phone church and dial a sermon and all that sort of stuff, if you just go to bryonytaylor.com, you'll find I've done some step-by-step guides on how to do those things. And that's it. Yeah, so I've got some questions for the breakout rooms, which I think will be shared a little bit later, but just to reflect on some of the things I've been saying. But what I would mostly encourage you to share with each other is anything positive that you've learned about ministry or about yourself in the last year. And I'll just finish by sharing what I've learned in the last year, which is that self-care is work, and don't feel guilty for looking after yourself. And something that I've tried to do in the last few months, and it's one of those things that we all should do anyway, but I've been crossing out a day a month in my diary as a quiet day. And I know that's something that all priests should do anyway, but not all of us are very good at it, and I'm certainly not. And earlier this year, I had quite a bad bereavement. Of a close friend of mine died, and actually it just so happened that I'd put this quiet day in the diary just on a day when I just could not function. I just couldn't do it. And because I'd put the day in my diary, I didn't feel remotely guilty about taking that day as a sort of just a blob day, duvet day, and also a time to pray as well. But it was really just a day where I just needed to kind of hide in a hole. And I think if I hadn't put that day in my diary, I probably would have tried to power through and then collapsed or something, or burst into tears on someone or something like that. And so I was so relieved that I think God had something to do with it, probably. But I would just encourage you to see self-care as part of your job as well, because I think I always used to feel it was a bit self-indulgent to put a quiet day in the diary, and it's not, because otherwise you can't pour from an empty cup, can you? I think that's the main principle. Right, I've slightly gone over time, so I'm going to stop there and allow people to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Bryony, for all your inspiration. I love the fact that we've got loads of ideas there for everybody, really, not just people with high-tech equipment, but also if you've got a chalkboard or looking at telephone church. I think really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And also these different categories, thinking about the curious observers and the online and the congregation without the internet. That's really helpful. So yes, I'm thoroughly inspired. So yes, please please, people, do type any questions that you have in the comments, and I'll feed them through. We've had a question from Hugh Montgomery, who asks, what's the link to enable dial a sermon?
It's, well, the easiest thing to do is probably I'll share the my blog post. I think it's probably the easiest thing. There's quite a detailed video that will take you through how to do it. Which I think, where is it? It's on my website somewhere. Creating dialer sermon system. Here we go. I'll just share that. And again, that's something that I will. I'm going to keep dialer sermon going. It costs a little bit of money, but not a lot. I think I've spent £20 in the last year on that, so it's not. It doesn't break the bank. Right, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll just pop the link in the chat for you. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, it's come through. Thanks, Bryony. It's more of a comment really than a question. Good old-fashioned one-to-one phone calls were a bit of a lifeline. But then there's that whole thing about not knowing what to say when I know I've had this too with I've been trying to sort of keep up with people. I found
it exhausting. Like I split up my kind of electoral role and kind of tried to, and I found that I could only do 5 calls a day. I could not do more than that because it was just absolutely exhausting. And it did get quite hard. I mean, I've got quite 2 congregations, so I was actually only really getting around them about once a month. So it wasn't, or even less frequently. So I was quite lucky in a way in that when I rang them, there was a couple of weeks of things to talk about at least. But yeah, it was quite hard. But yeah, the phone call thing was quite important. Certainly the phone church been an absolute lifeline. And when we first started it,
such a good idea.
When we first started it, because I nicked the idea from a mate that's a vicar in Wensleydale actually, and he's got like 8 churches. They've got crap internet, and so he just decided to do everything on the phone. And so he does his Sunday mornings on the phone, he does his midweek, and he invited me to preach at his midweek. So I tried it with him, and then was like, oh, I'm going to do this. So I nicked it from him. But one of the ladies that attended the first time we did it, she said to me, I feel like I've been out, she said. She'd been shielding for months.
Oh, that's lovely.
And she just heard all her friends' voices on the phone. And now what happens is people arrive a bit early on the phone and they all have a bit of a natter and ask each other how they are. And it's quite funny as well. I mean, I love it because it's much more intimate than doing Facebook church because you can hear all the voices. There's one guy that's a bit deaf at my church in Bulborough, and he shouts the liturgy at you, and it just cracks me up. And also with you, it's like it's kind of, and you can hear the voice booming at your phone, but it's lovely. It's lovely. And I find that's probably been one of the best things. And when I set it up, I was like, why on earth have I not done this before? Because it's a no-brainer.
So is there one liturgical resource which you found really helpful in lamenting the past and embracing the future out of all those wonderful things you've given us?
A liturgical resource. I'm a bit conscious I've not massively talked to lots about liturgy. Probably not really. I mean, I think we've all been kind of making up as we go along a little bit, really. One thing that I have done that I didn't mention actually in my talk was at Christmas and just this recent Easter, I used Stations of the Nativity and Stations of the Resurrection, and I made them on A3, and I actually reflected. I've got a couple of books that have got the stations in them, but what I did was for each station I wrote a couple of sentences reflecting on the pandemic. So I talked about, I'm trying to think of an example now. When with one of the Stations of the Resurrection where they have the breakfast on the beach, I think I put something like, give thanks for the time when we will be able to share a meal with friends together again. So I made it very accessible to non-church folk. And then I put them on A3 posters and then laminated them, and I put them on the railings along the side of church. But I also did it as a podcast and put it on our website and on Facebook. So I found that I think the stations idea, so Stations of the Cross as well, we did. But using Stations of the Nativity, and we did Stations of the Spirit last year, didn't we, for Pentecost?
Yeah.
I think those have been quite good because they've taken people on a bit of a journey and enabled them to connect the sort of Christian story to our story during the pandemic. So I guess, out of liturgical resources, I'd say probably that doing that's been helpful and been quite a good way of reaching out to people that aren't churched, because I think stations are quite easy for people to follow.
Yes. If anybody's interested in Stations of the Spirit, if you go onto YouTube and just type Stations of the Spirit into the search box, a set of online videos, Stations of the Spirit, should hopefully appear with Bryony as one of the speakers. And it's interesting that a year later, a lot of that stuff is still relevant because, of course, some of the reflections were on the pandemic. Yes. Sheila's mentioned a pioneer priest who hung card hearts with short messages on the tree at the front of her garden. I think it's a wonderful idea about using any space as liturgical space, using your railings, using your garden, the footpaths that people pass, is really getting me thinking about where do people travel and how can we help them to pray as they're on that journey, really. So they're almost praying without even realizing it. I love that idea. Yes, of course. Then when we've got our notice boards, of course, we need to work out what to put on it, prayers or quotes or that sort of thing. So Jenny's asked, have you got any good sources of places to get?
Well, actually, they can be a bit cheesy, but there's a Facebook page I follow called Mindful Christianity, and that shares quite good quotes. So some of them I've got from there. The other week I was chatting to a friend and she gave me one that I used, which was quite a nice one, actually. The winds of grace are always blowing. We just have to set our sails, which I quite liked. So that was one of them that I did. And it was funny, when I did that one, it was a really windy week. So loads of people commented and said, oh, this one's relevant this week. One funny thing that happened, and my husband said this straight away. He said, someone's going to smash that, when I put it up. And they did. So because it's an A-frame, and so, one side I just had some information about engaging with our worship online and stuff. It just said welcome to St James's, and it just said this is our website and we're on Facebook and stuff. So it was just generic information, and then the quotes on the other side. And I think it was probably some bored children or teenagers kicked in one side of the A-frame. But what I did was I basically, rather than kind of complain about it, I just put for that week the quote, and I just put, God loves you. Yes, you who kicked in the other side of this notice board. And then I just put, that's what's so amazing about grace. And it was fab because I bumped into a couple of people that don't come to church, but I think they're mums from the local school. And they said, oh, we loved what you put. At least you addressed what had happened. And he told them Jesus loved them. And they thought it was really good. So it was kind of a talking point, but in a really positive way, because it could have turned into a kind of, oh, aren't teenagers terrible? And I didn't want it to go down that route. So at the moment it's only got one side, and it might get destroyed, but I'll just buy another one. It was only 20 quid, so
but if it does, it's easily replaced, unlike sort of super expensive tech equipment. And I love the fact those principles that good liturgy actually responds to our everyday life and what's going on, and that instant reactions, and being very conscious of what's happening in the outside world and responding to that thing rather than being just very generic. I think people always appreciate it when we personalize things. David's mentioned that he did a stop motion nativity in a voiceover. But the great thing about it, just a reminder, is that we can reuse these resources. We can adapt and change them according to our new contexts. And I know I've certainly been doing a bit of recycling over lockdown, digging out old videos and realizing, back in the days of film and low resolution stuff, but that actually some of this stuff was still quite relevant, and putting new voices overs or new music on it, new liturgies on it, and recycling it. The art of holy recycling.
definitely. And I think with the stations, actually, I think that I'll probably do that regularly now, because I've realised that space along the railings works really well, and I have seen
I
people
love that idea that you can just stumble across it and stumble into prayer.
And so
that's really helpful.
the kind of the Bible bits stay the same, but you can change the little reflection sentence to reflect whatever's going on in your community at that given moment, you know.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, you've offered us so much in terms of a big toolkit of wonderful ideas to get playing with. So thank you so much for that, Bryony. And now I think it's time to pass over to the breakout rooms are about to start. So Christopher's going to explain more.
I'm just going to explain what we're going to do. So we're going to divide you into breakout rooms, and in a moment you should get an invitation to join the breakout room. Bryony has set us some questions which I'll get her to repeat in just a moment. When you get to the breakout room, don't forget you will need to unmute yourself, and there should be in each breakout room one of our practice committee members there to help facilitate. If by any chance that doesn't happen, I'm sure somebody will take the lead. Feel free to do so. We have allocated 20 minutes for this till 1 o'clock, when we will then break for lunch for half an hour. If you want, over that lunch period, you can stay in your breakout room if you're having a nice chat together and you just want to carry on with that, that's absolutely fine. You can leave, or you could leave your breakout room and return to the main meeting where there will be some music and video playing. Or just take a complete break if that's what you want to do. If you do log out completely because you want to free up your internet for a while, then that's okay, and we will make sure that we let you back in after the lunch break. So, Bryony, would you like to just repeat the questions that you've got for us for the discussion groups, please? Yeah. So who's missing from what you're offering at the moment?
Sorry, I just
which
realised I was
group
on
do you feel you need to focus? Oh, right. Go on, Bryony, you read them.
Sorry about that. Oh, rookie error. Feel free to ignore these, by the way. These are just to start conversations. I mean, there might be other things you'd rather talk about. But yeah, I think the question of who's missing is a really important one, just so that we've got inclusion really at the heart of what we're doing. And I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of the pandemic is that churches are getting better at including people, especially people with disabilities, people with long-term health conditions and stuff, involving them in church. So many of my disabled friends have been kind of tearing their hair out a little bit because they've been crying out for online church for years, and then suddenly we all did it last year and people were patting themselves on the back and they were saying, well, we wanted this for so long and it's been possible. So I think asking who's missing is important. You might want to have a think about that Venn diagram that I shared about which congregations that you're kind of throwing your energies on, and are you kind of ignoring anyone? And then the last one really, and I think we want to try and be as positive as we can. What positive thing have you learned about ministry in the last year to share with those in your group? And mine was, of course, about learning about self-care really, and realizing how important that is. But you might have learned something else. So yeah, there you go. But you can talk about what you like really.
So we've got about 20 minutes in those groups. You'll be getting an invitation just in a moment, and then we carry on through till lunch break at 1 o'clock and resume at past.
I'd like to welcome everybody back. My name is Ursula Hodges, and I'm one of the Praxis South Committee. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce the Reverend Canon Anna Macham. Anna is the precentor at Salisbury Cathedral and has been in that post for almost 2 years. Previously, she was at St Philip's in Camberwell for 6 years, and before that, successor at Southwark Cathedral and chaplain to the students at King's College, London. Anna is going to talk to us about the particular role that a cathedral can have in ministering to people's needs during the pandemic, and how the cathedral has offered comfort and solace in this time. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, so I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. So I'm going to be speaking for the next 20-25 minutes or so on the theme of lamenting the past and embracing the future as responded to by a cathedral, and looking at things liturgically from a cathedral perspective. So our journey at Salisbury began through COVID with the closing of the doors, like everyone else, on the 23rd of March. And I still very much remember the shock of that, and having to ask all the last visitors to exit the building. An open door, especially in a huge building like Salisbury Cathedral, is a threshold, giving you a foretaste of what you'll find when you get inside. And obviously, when you enter the cathedral, you're very much obviously entering a sacred space, and one that was designed, like other Gothic cathedrals, to give an image of heaven and harmony. So one threshold, the door, opens onto another, the threshold of earth and heaven. So to suddenly have to close the doors like that felt like a massive wrench, as I'm sure it did everywhere. Cathedrals like this one are obviously designed to evoke awe and bring people into the presence of God. And quite apart from any liturgical considerations, I think just the building itself provides huge comfort for people. And we can't really talk about the liturgy in this case without talking about the building. The building is very much designed exactly for the performance of the liturgy. You know, the huge aisle, the wide aisles, the huge arches, the opportunities for theatrical worship and long processions and so on, which obviously during COVID had to be completely stopped and extremely limited. So there's also that sense of comfort, I think, just from the very stones of the building, that sense of stability and the place having been there for such a long time. And I think not even being able to film in the building was very difficult for people and caused quite a lot of anger and upset that people in need of comfort couldn't get access to the building. So we had to work out ways of bringing the building and our liturgy to people in their homes, which was for us a very new thing, a new challenge to do. A particular challenge we faced at the start of the lockdown was that I and the liturgy and music team at the cathedral have been working really hard on a big service to celebrate the 800th anniversary of the laying of the foundation stones of the cathedral. That was scheduled for the 28th of April. So we'd been planning a whole sequence of events and services for that, with an outdoor service at Old Sarum, which is about 1.5 miles out of Salisbury, which is a very windswept and rugged site of the original cathedral before it moved down 800 years ago to the current location where the cathedral is now, where the new cathedral was going to be built. Then we also, apart from the Old Sarum service, had an outreach day planned for children, with a special translation that had been made of a medieval poem about the moving of the cathedral that had been set to music for them to perform and learn, and then finally a big civic service with traditional hymns and choir anthems and formal prayers and the blessing of a new stone. But of course we had to change all of that, like everyone else, and put it online, and there really wasn't that much time to sort it all out. That the full capacity of the cathedral is 1,800, and it felt really odd, not to be able to celebrate this particular event inside the cathedral and have to bring it to people in their homes. So rather than invite them into the building to do the opposite and bring the building out. In the service, we were still able to use the poem. So we got an actor to come in and read it for us, or record, well, not come in obviously, but record it for us to use in our service. And we had to rely quite heavily then still on the back catalogue of choir CDs that we had. It took a little while for our choristers being at home to sort of get the hang of recording hymns themselves on their own. It's quite a challenging thing to suddenly ask people to do. So we were able to ask them to record one piece that we included in the service. But we also found quite a lot of archive footage too from the archive of pictures of the building from previous celebrations or previous services marking big anniversaries. So we were able to use drone footage as well, which was also an effective way of bringing the building out to others. One thing we found was a dramatized reading, which we invited children in the congregation to record at home too. So that was a lovely way of including people in a way that we perhaps wouldn't have done in a formal civic service in the cathedral. I would say, I think that generally reflecting on our online worship during that beginning time, it did enable us to be more inventive in some ways, to include a greater range of ages with maybe a slightly less formal approach to the liturgy. And I think also, although it was really sad not to be able to have this service in the cathedral, the whole theme did enable us to bring comfort to people, because obviously being able to reflect on the fact that the cathedral has been there for 800 years and so on did bring comfort, and we were able to relate that to the current situation. And also the idea that reflecting on the story of the move, it wasn't a simple thing to move the cathedral from Old Sarum to here, and there were many obstacles that the canons and the clergy had to face at that time, such as getting their civil authorities on board, and all the problems they had at Old Sarum too, with it being a windswept site and not being adequate anymore for their needs for worship. So it gave us lots of opportunities to make links, I think, in a way that was creative, even though it wasn't how we planned. Before the anniversary service, we had Holy Week and Easter. This was my first Holy Week and Easter at the cathedral, which was interesting. So I've still never experienced it in a normal way. And it was odd to spend that first Holy Week and Easter not having access to the building, but the fact that it had to be completely different again did allow us to be more inventive in some ways. I think it was difficult, but in some ways it was quite freeing. Again, we were pretty constrained at that point to using pre-recorded music from the choir CDs, as well as some pieces that the choir recorded specially. But there were no Easter hymns at all, so that was an interesting challenge. And we did use quite a rousing anthem, Alleluia Laudate Pueri Dominum by Francis Jackson, which worked really well. And the hymn I Danced in the Morning, which again is probably not one I would have chosen for a formal Easter Day service in the cathedral, but actually worked really well. So it did lead me to reflect that, sometimes having constraints actually makes you be more creative, and that could be a good thing that's come out of this crisis. Luckily, we did have on the recordings the George Herbert Rise Heart from the 5 Mystical Songs by Vaughan Williams, which I think is always inspiring and comforting to people, especially with the George Herbert connection here. So also one innovation liturgically during this time that we did do, again, very much with the idea of bringing the cathedral and its liturgy to the people, was the virtual Holy Week pilgrimage that we devised with our marketing team. This was in addition to the Holy Week services themselves, by the way. It wasn't instead of them. But the idea was that it's a virtual tour of the cathedral, but it's focused on a journey. It's made into a journey through Holy Week. So each day, a new day of the week was added, and you could click on it, and a member of the clergy would pop up leading a prayer. Although we recorded all of the prayers and introductions in our houses and gardens, it was sort of superimposed onto the tour of the cathedral. And I think it was really popular doing this. Like, people loved, the idea of the pilgrimage and a different stage being added each day. So it was really nice to be able to do something more creative. And again, the creativity of sort of linking the different days with different areas of the cathedral. So I did Good Friday, and we linked that to the spire crossing. So, the cross-shaped building, the point where we look up to heaven and we lift to God all that pains us and bring to him all the violence and trauma and difficulty of this world, as we reflect on the struggling and suffering of Jesus dying on the cross. I think the idea was very much as well that maybe a wider online constituency might engage with something like this, because it was short. Each segment only lasted sort of probably 10 minutes maximum. There was a piece of music, a prayer, an introduction, and a short reading. So it was sort of for our regular congregation, but also the idea being that more people might engage with Holy Week worship, despite not having access to the actual liturgical space. And I think, again, I would say that's something that I've very much taken out of these times of COVID, that, doing something short can be more effective, especially online. I think I've been quite fascinated by the theme of pilgrimage as well, from Holy Week and other times. On Palm Sunday, we read an extract from Egeria's pilgrimage on the Palm Sunday in Jerusalem, the first account of liturgically what happened, or an early account. And it reminded me that there've always been vivid written travelogues and diaries. There's always been a recognition that not everyone will be able to participate in real time and place with worship or with pilgrimages. So it's not a modern idea, although we have different technology for sharing and helping people to picture the scene in their mind's eye and use it as a focus for their thoughts and prayers and devotion. And we know as well that online prayer apps are really popular. We knew that already before COVID, reading Teresa Berger's book, Being at Worship, the at being their @ sign as on an email address. That's really interesting on especially younger people are much more statistically likely to engage with something like this maybe than to actually come to a service. So it does show how important this kind of thing is. So on the 15th of June, we were allowed to reopen after the first lockdown for private prayer. It was great to open the doors again and allow people just to have access to the space, even if we weren't yet allowed to do anything liturgically. Just being able to come in felt massive. And the building itself still has power, even apart from the services we lead in it. You can tell this is early because we're still wearing the face visors rather than the masks, as we were recommended at that time. So people could obviously come in and light a candle, which is a very simple thing that many of us could offer. We open daily for 4 hours for prayer and contemplation, slightly less time on a Sunday to allow people to watch the pre-recorded worship. And anyone obviously could come, and there was a real mixture of regular worshippers and others who came in, and just a chance to offer that space of quiet and comfort and to access the building, which was much desired. Again, we tried to sort of theme our reopening as a pilgrimage. We worked out a route to take people around the building, partly because we didn't want to open the whole building, just part of the nave, which was all we could staff at that time. We did have a limited amount of seating, but I think part of the logic of the route, apart from it being COVID safe, was to monitor the flow of people and to keep people moving. We didn't really want them to stay for too long, because of having the limited capacity and the danger of causing a bottleneck, because we didn't know how many people would come. So again, we used that as a chance to have prayer stations. So we made it a kind of pilgrimage through the building. And there was an opportunity to light a candle in 3 different places. And partly because we couldn't do anything publicly led liturgically, we decided to do something simple liturgically to guide people that they could use themselves as they came back in the building, and kept it very simple. We did have more elaborate plans about more prayer stations initially, but in the end, this was all we could really manage. And I think it was enough because we wanted to keep the route simple. So the first one, each one had a particular focus and was somehow related to a part of the building. So the first one was the font. And if you know the font in the cathedral, if you know the font, in the words of a previous presenter, it is beautiful, large, and unignorable. And it stands at the converging points of the main concourse, so that everyone is drawn to it. The water in the font is always flowing, and you can hear it. So, it points north, south, east, and west. So it feels like a good focal point for people to stop on at this first point in the simple prayer journey. And we offered them the chance to just reflect on where they'd come from and where they were going, on all that had happened and all that was still to happen at this point in the crisis, and then offered simple questions and a simple prayer. Then we directed people in the pilgrimage through to the spire crossing, which is, as I said, like a crossroads, so that this seemed an appropriate focus for the future, with a prayer that would hopefully give comfort. And at each of the stations, we also provided an email address for people to email their prayer concerns and prayer requests if they wanted to. And later, we also developed an online candle lighting site, where we also said we would light candles in the cathedral for each person who posted a candle online, but that wasn't something we developed until the most recent lockdown. So this point was about transition out of the first lockdown, and tried to address some of the fears that people might have in an open-ended and low-key way, again, just by asking these simple questions for people to personally think about and meditate on as they walked around. And then finally, in the north transept, this is sort of near the chapel in the cathedral where we remember our linked dioceses of South Sudan and Sudan. And it wasn't really until COVID, interestingly, that we kind of thought about the fact that we could ask the bishops there to record things that we could include in our online worship, which we did in the first lockdown. Have one of the bishops in one of the linked dioceses speak about how desperate the situation was becoming there, which helped us to set up a fundraising campaign at that particular time for them. It felt important for one of the stations to have a wider focus, and also to be a focus of prayer as people prepared to leave and go back out from this sacred and quiet space into the world. And all the stations were designed to be capable of being used alone as well as in the set of 3. I think my experience is also that, the building speaks for itself, and we don't always know what spiritual experiences people are having in a particular moment. I think it can often feel like a cathedral is a big anonymous space, yet having things like the prayer stations sort of helped us to create a particular focus for people's prayers as well, and hopefully to create more of a feeling of intimacy in the way people could respond. Then we had our first service back after lockdown. Again, lots of planning went into this, and I'm sure it's true everywhere as well, not just in cathedrals. But by this point, we had started to live stream, and that was a huge thing for us, involving huge expense and working out the best way of doing that, and obviously achieving the right levels of picture and sound quality to represent the choir and the building at their best. And again, I would say shots of the building are very much sort of part of that, and part of the streaming of the worship. Obviously, the daily office and the tradition of daily choral evensong are a big part of the cathedral tradition. And I would say my experience has maybe been that evensong is an easier one to put online because it maybe lends itself a bit better. It's a reflective service. It's punctuated by words and reading, words and music. So the music kind of breaks up the text, and we didn't really have to adapt it very much. And because it's a relatively short service again as well, I think that also lends itself. Whereas I've had some feedback from people that communion, the Eucharist, can sort of make you feel excluded. It can do. I mean, people have also said they appreciate it being online, but Eucharist is about communion and being together, whereas there could be a feeling that evensong is perhaps allows you a bit more to be anonymous if that's what you want anyway in a cathedral. And again, it also felt important to put it online because in our experience, evensong is one that's growing numerically. So again, giving people access to that online felt important. And we have noticed actually that since people could come back into in-person worship with the choir, our numbers for people watching evensong online have stayed the same. They haven't gone down. So again, that would suggest that it's fulfilling a need. Of course, there are lots of things to consider with the online services. You know, how far do you look at the camera? How far do you make it a kind of fly on the wall type experience? And, you know, we've had lots of many discussions and opinions about that, as I'm sure everyone else has. But again, I think evensong is one that really lends itself to that type of experience. When it came to All Souls, we decided again to open for private prayer and simply allow people to come in and light a candle. Again, I would describe that as a liturgical response. You know, liturgy isn't just about words and leading prayers from the front. So we did have prayers on the hour for that, and also prayer resources that people could take. And there was a chance to buy a flower as well to remember a loved one. We also linked that to the remembrance, the All Souls Day service we had, which was a Eucharist and the Friar Requiem, which again I think is a very accessible piece of music for people that people appreciated being able to hear in the context of the live worship. And again, the Ray of Hope, a light installation that we had around that time as well, also brought hope to people very much, especially as the second lockdown began. Normally, Darkness to Light, our Advent service, is our big sort of flagship service of the year. It runs with three services over the Advent weekend, and the capacity is 1,800 for each one. And it normally, this is a photo of what it normally looks like from a time-lapse video that Ash Mills, our photographer, made of the service, and the gradual filling of the building with light as the procession moves around it. Obviously, the building is very much designed for these large, elaborate processions with the wide aisles, and it's a quiet and beautiful and solemn service, but also quite a theatrical and splendid one. So we did talk about ways of attempting to recreate that, but we rejected them all as being too sort of uncertain and complicated in the time that we were planning, and would have had to, the timescale we'd have had to do that in. So instead, we decided to put on a regular evensong, which might not seem very imaginative, but actually one thing we never do here is a regular evensong on Advent Sunday, and the chance to have a short homily as well felt really important to make that sort of direct and intimate connection with people. And of course, we could still include some of the key musical items like the Advent responsory from the Sarum Breviary at the beginning, with its sort of solo voice from the choir and the plain song. And I think I've certainly learned that it's true that worship doesn't have to be grand to be transformative. Even in the spacious opportunities of cathedrals and large churches, sometimes the most effective worship is the most simple. And it also feels really important to, one thing that a cathedral can do, or all our churches can do, is to mark those high points of the liturgical year, as Advent definitely is one here. That people say, don't they, that COVID has kind of flattened our sense of time, and those, with the important markers of time being taken away, it's even more important for us to mark those ritual high points, even if it's only in a reduced way. And the benefits of that are documented and strong, in helping people to deal with change and to get comfort and to restore our sense of time. So again, as we approached Christmas, it still felt important to mark this, but again, in a much simplified way. So we tried to pick music choices that were accessible, and again, included a homily where we wouldn't have done in carol services before. And again, offered more quiet evensongs, that not having lots of special services and carol services at that time did enable us to offer those quiet daily opportunities. This was something we'd never done before. Our new minor canon for young people put together a short service, especially for children and families, that we put online. Normally, we'd have a sort of bigger service for families with big puppets and more theatrical and involved, but this quiet thing really was popular online with the donkey as well. Just finally, I think Easter is obviously a big high point as well here at the Cathedral, and the Easter Vigil is normally a massive service, that the climax of our liturgical celebrations, and that the Easter Vigil normally has a massive bonfire on the west lawn outside the west front here. But again, we obviously couldn't do that and had to rethink it this year, and this year the fire was very small. And it's still effective though, and I think it reminded me, the point of the fire is simply to provide the flame from which the Easter candle is lit, and it maybe brings the candle more into focus than we normally would because of the fire being so big. So we also didn't have an organist or any kind of choir for this one, just a lone cantor. So as we entered the building and held the vigil and gradually filled the place with light as the procession progressed, we accompanied the vigil readings with plain song psalm responses. And again, I think the simplicity can be just as effective, as the plain chant is really there to colour the words and can be beautiful in its own right. I think we've found generally that shorter forms can work well. So we've had a daily midday prayer, again, a short form in common worship that can be followed by chat, and compline as well in Holy Week. The use of chant again in its simplicity with one voice or two solo voices worked well online and was received very positively. And even just silence, I hadn't realised that could work so well online either. We decided to live stream the vigil on Maundy Thursday, which I kind of wondered whether that would be necessary or not. But again, we did have feedback that people watched the whole thing and found it really powerful to join in. And then on Good Friday, the fact that the choir, we were so constrained where the choir could stand, they were much closer to us in the liturgy, singing the John Sanders reproaches, which felt very dramatic. So again, we were able to create quite a powerful atmosphere on Good Friday, I think, and that the empty building with live stream only did create quite a sense of desolation, I think, with the cross being processed up the central nave aisle with a cathedral not full of people as it normally would have been. And just very finally, to quickly say something about the use of the cathedral as a vaccination centre. This was a huge privilege for us to be able to do that and attracted a lot of press attention. When we were approached initially by the NHS to do this, we didn't realise what a big thing it would be. And again, it was commented on very positively. That there was the cartoon in the Daily Telegraph of people getting jabbed with a simple headline, salvation. And the comment was made several times that we have the most needly spire, so it's appropriate to get your jab here. But for me, I think the powerful thing was the coming together of the spiritual and physical aspects of healing. And people said they found it an inspiration to have it in the cathedral, in a place of prayer where they could come for hope and healing, physical and spiritual, that seemed to be right. We didn't do anything liturgical especially, but the fact that we had the organ playing, I think, was what made it so prominent, or what made the press kind of focus on Salisbury as one of the places that did the vaccinations, one of the cathedrals. And again, I think it did really help to sort of get the sense of it being a place of worship. It adds to the sense of it being a sacred space. And again, the creation of a sense of awe. I think even when the organ was playing Star Wars, still kind of created a certain atmosphere that people commented on very positively and found helpful. And people did say that they appreciated the chance to say a prayer as well. And I think there is that sense of it being a lived-in liturgical space that where people could, involve themselves in their own private thoughts and prayers as they were waiting. Again, also, it was interesting to us that quite a few people who came to get their jabs said they'd never been in the cathedral before. So the big challenge to us is to think, how do we bring them back? And so that's kind of the next challenge that we're focusing on. We are going to organise a big service, for when we can, for next year probably now, to invite the NHS back and to lament and look forward together. But yeah, I think that sort of brings us up to the present in our response to COVID, and I've probably talked for way too long, so I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear what you and the cathedral have achieved in this time, and the support that you have brought to people through the cathedral. A number of people in the chat have posted questions, and one particularly they have asked, several people asked, is there a way they can have a copy of the prayer stations?
Oh yeah, I can send that, definitely.
Yes, if you send it to me, then we can get it, or to the committee, then we can put it onto our website. I expect that will be the easiest way, so that people can get it. The other thing that you raised, a lot of questions that people felt resonated with their own experiences about the advantages, but also the difficulties of interacting through live streaming of services. And you mentioned about the debate that took place as to how to install the cameras and what to actually film. Should it be fly on the wall? And people have asked, what did you decide in the end? Did you decide to talk to camera, or?
We seem to, I think for Evensong, partly because of the angles of where the cameras are, we can't really do that. So it's kind of at an angle. So we don't talk directly to camera, but because of the angle it is, I think it's still quite intimate and could feel a bit, you don't look like you're looking away from the camera, put it that way. And the times when we have talked to camera, I think, are more in the Eucharist, I would say. When we preach, we always speak to camera, which is kind of easier from the angles of where the camera is in the pulpit. And again, when we didn't have anyone in the building, it would have felt very odd to not have anything at all where you speak directly to the camera. So that's the key one. I think we've also sort of taken in more individual decisions as well about whether we speak to camera or not, but it's not always so easy to achieve in such a big building.
Yes, and the other thing you mentioned about the Evensongs, but also I thought was particularly interesting in your role as presenter, the discovering how effective the use of one or two voices rather than the full choir. And a number of people have asked, do you feel that some of these are new traditions that you might take forward, that you found new liturgical resources?
I'd like to think so. I think we haven't quite got to that point really of working out exactly what will be taken forward. With the use of cantors, I think so. I think so, certainly in some forms. But I think it will depend on decisions we make as well about, you know, what the choral services are and the balance between those things. So I wouldn't say for us we've got to the point of making any decisions about that. But I would say that, you know, the issue of live streaming, definitely, like I would think we're definitely going to want to live stream at least some evensongs in the future. That's a definite. I want to ask what others think as well, but they're probably too on the call to do that.
You mentioned also, and I'll probably make this the last question because I'm conscious we have the service to move on to. You talked at the beginning about that it provided opportunities for instead of bringing people into the building, of taking the building out to people. And that seemed a very moving idea, and the idea of bringing the cathedral into people's lives. Do you think that idea of bringing people in, the cathedral into people's lives will be something that you will be thinking of as a chapter?
I hope so. I think as a mentality, it's a different way of thinking, perhaps, because I think a lot of our outreach is focused on bringing people in because the building is such a draw and it's so kind of unignorable. You know, the outreach is to kind of provide opportunities for people. But yeah, it is a powerful reminder that we also need to be taking the building and what it does out and engaging with people, you know, in new ways. And I think we all have had to learn to be more adaptable. So the fact that you can just suddenly put quite a formal civic type service to celebrate a big anniversary online and work out a slightly different, not be afraid to work out a different way of doing it, and perhaps using choices of music and so on that you wouldn't have thought of or chosen, but you have to because that's what's available. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Can be more flexible in our thinking.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, and I'm sure we're all going to look forward to what Salisbury Cathedral decides to do in your commemorative service and in the year to come. I'm going to and I must say that the number of messages from everybody coming through the chat to say thank you and how inspirational it's been. It's not just me saying it, there's others as well. Can I hand back to Norman, and he will bring us onwards in our event.
Thank you all very much indeed. We've had a very rich offering today from the different contexts of hospital chaplaincy, parochial ministry, and cathedral ministry. And all of us, as we try to lament all that's been very difficult and express that liturgically and enable others to express it liturgically, but also give some hope for the future and embracing the possibilities that are there. All of us are paying attention to our own contexts, I think, in that. And I think from the three offerings we've had a lot of material which we can sometimes use as it is and sometimes then adapt to our own context. So I want to say a very, very big thank you to Tim Coleman, Bryony Taylor and Anna Macham for all that they've shared today. Thank you very much indeed. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the members of Praxis South Committee who have organised this event, to Christopher, Ursula, Stuart and Sue, and a particular thank you also to Christopher again, but also to Colin, who enable us to function in this way. It's remarkable that it's so easy when people know what they're doing. to offer this sort of event online, and it saves a lot of time and resources for people to do so. So thank you to the organising group and to those who've enabled the Zoom to work today. My biggest thank you, of course, is always to all of you who have come along. There can be no event without the participants. So thank you very much for joining in this. We very much hope that you found it useful. It's given you some ideas, an opportunity perhaps to express some of your grief, but also to give ideas for the future and a bit more positive looking forward. We will, as usual, be making available a reflection sheet. We'd be very grateful if you would kindly fill that out and send it back to us. That would be enormously helpful. If you were watching over the lunch, you will have seen that we are hoping that our next event on the 14th of October will be both at Holy Trinity Sloane Square and also available live streamed. This will be a new venture for us, but we're up to new ventures in this time in which we now live. And the theme of that is building on our last event on daily prayer. We got some very good feedback up from that, but also people asking for more. So it's called Daily Prayer, an ancient tradition for modern times. And we will be exploring through our three speakers the foundations for daily prayer, the impact of recent experiences, particularly through the pandemic, and how daily prayer can contribute to building a true sense of community and being the body of Christ. If you'd like to book for that, that will soon be possible, and we would encourage you to do so. That's all from me, I think, at this point in time. We have a tradition now that we close with worship and then we don't say anything else after the worship. So I will say goodbye at this point on behalf of all my colleagues on the Praxis South Committee, and I'm going to hand over to Bryony, who will lead our closing worship for us.
Thank you very much, Norman, and it's been real inspiration to be with you all today. I've really enjoyed it, so thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I'm going to share my screen. The words for you to join in with will come up in yellow, and I think Sue's going to do the responses for me so that I'm not reading all the responses as well as the first bits. That's not a very liturgical word, is it? So let me just share my screen. And just to let you know, I did mention that thing called Screencast-O-Matic in my presentation. I've used that to video Google Earth, and for the prayers in this closing worship, we're going to watch a short video that I made using that little bit of software. So I thought I would just try and build in one of the things that I talked about into our worship this evening. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. And I've pinched this, like we all do, pinched this liturgy from St James's Piccadilly, and it's a form of daily office, and it uses material from Common Worship, Iona Community, and the other names that you can see on the screen there. So it's a mixture of different things. O Lord, open our lips,
and our mouth shall proclaim your praise.
We come before your presence,
You who are common to us all.
So we take a moment to reflect on the day that's been. And we pray St Patrick's breastplate. I bind unto myself today the strong name of the Trinity, by invocation of the same, the three in one and one in three, of whom all nature hath creation, eternal Father, Spirit, Word. Praise to the Lord of my salvation. Salvation is of Christ the Lord. So the canticle. Holy wisdom, delight of our God, you open our ears, we hear your word.
You enter deep into the being of humanity. Foolish to the world, you unmask our follies.
You are a shelter to us by day and a steady flame through the night. You lead us through turbulent waters and bring us safe to dry ground.
You open the mouths of those who are mute. You loosen the tongues of infants in their cries. A little child takes us by the hand and leads us to freedom and truth.
Holy wisdom, delight of our God, you open our ears, we hear your word.
Glory to God, source of all being, eternal Word and Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be forever. Amen.
Spirit of wisdom, take from us all fuss, the clattering of noise, the temptation to dominate by the power of words, the craving for certainty. Lead us through the narrow gate of not knowing, that we may listen and obey, and come to a place of silence and stillness, of true conversation and wisdom. A reading from the first letter of Peter. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. For the roots of our community, for what we share together, for the path that lies before us now, and our future in your hands, we give you thanks and praise. Amen. So we gaze on our beautiful shared home. We pray for the place where we live. As we zoom in, you can begin to see the outlines of countries. Pray for all these countries as you feel led. Pray for the millions of people, flora and fauna, its natural features. We can see the continent of which we are a part. We pray for these nations of Europe. We come a little closer to home. Praying for our nation, for its government and people. Thinking of the souls of all who have been lost to COVID-19 and other conditions in this last year. All those who have been working so hard to keep us going. And now picture in your mind's eye the place where you are. Praying for its people, its church congregations. And finally zoom right into the room that you are in. And bring before God your own concerns. He knows even how many hairs there are on your head. How mind-blowing it is that he hears all of our concerns, that we can cast all our anxieties on him, because he cares for us. So we bring all of our thoughts and prayers together by saying the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.